With the final DLC for Battlefield 1 releasing, I've been thinking a lot about the next Battlefield game confirmed to be released in October of this year. And I've been wondering, if I was in charge, if I had the choice, what features would I carry across from BF1 to a new game, and of course, which features would I get rid of? Whenever a new Battlefield game comes out, the developers need to try and work out what content or features are going to carry across to the next game and what's going to be left on the scrap heap. It got me thinking what features I definitely keep and what features I would almost certainly get rid of, or at the very least overhaul from BF1. Now this is going to be a two-part video, and in this part we're going to go over the things that I don't want to see return in the next game. And remember, this is all my opinion and preference. Some of you guys will completely disagree with me and have other opinions entirely, and that's completely fine. So let's start with something that's bugged me since BF1 released: weapon variants. I'm sure they must bother other people too. I just don't like having a list of weapons that includes the same weapon with essentially different attachments and stats. I want to go back to the system we had in BF3 and BF4, where you've got one weapon and then you can set that weapon up how you like with certain attachments and scopes, rather than having these specific variants. That's a lot more interesting for me, and it adds more player choice to the game. I think the weapon customization itself is very lacking in BF1, and a lot of that comes down to the time period, so it would be great to see that improved upon. If we can get a visualization of the weapon with various attachments going on, to see exactly how those attachments or scopes will change the weapon stats, that would be fantastic, and I think DICE could really set that out in a very simple and basic way to understand. What about the bayonet charge and the melee system in BF1? Personally, I'd love to see the bayonet charge removed, and of course that depends on the setting of the game. A bayonet charge might not even be present, but I think in the current version of BF1 it needs a longer charge up time so it's not as cheesable. But it's not just the bayonet charge too. Let's talk about melee takedowns from the front. Melee takedowns are cool, they look great, and they definitely have their place in the game. It's very satisfying to knife someone from behind, but I'd rather that you were only able to do it from the back or the sides. I don't like the fact that if a player is on low health, you can just lock onto them with no counter and take them down in one melee hit. Take it back to how it used to be. Melee takedown is a one shot from behind or from the side, but at the front, you're just going to swipe them and do 50 damage without actually locking on. Suppression too, I mean, that's another system in the game that's a bit Marmite. I think some players really like it and others not so much. I'm on the fence with this one as I understand the reasoning behind it, but I do think it's a bit much in BF1 at times, but at least it's not as bad as it used to be in BF3. Maybe a compromise is needed here that we can settle on, just a reduction overall in suppression so it's got less of an effect. I'd be very happy with that. I also don't want to see the return of the inconsistent DLC release schedule like BF1 has had. We had Giant Shadow in December of 2016, not that very good of a map to be honest with you, and then They Shall Not Pass released on 14th of March. But the next full DLC was actually released on September 19th, and that was In the Name of the Tsar. That's 6 months between a DLC release date, but then Turning Tides was split and part released in December and then January, and of course Apocalypse, the last DLC, released the month after in February 2018. The timing is a bit all over the place really, and it's inconsistent. Now I'm sure there are many reasons why DLCs were scattered about, but I just hope that for the next game we can move towards a monthly update schedule for new content, or at the very least have a new DLC say every 2 to 3 months so the content drop is spread out and consistent. Also, please do away with the premium pass. If DICE were to do a monthly update system, you could perhaps add more new weapons, cosmetics, maps. Would people be happier with a system like that? I think so. I mean, is it even possible from a development standpoint, as they probably do multiple maps at the same time? Or as a player, would you rather have the excitement of a full DLC launch with multiple weapons and maps? And just going back to what I said there, we don't want to see premium in the next game. We know that Battlefront 2 has moved away from the premium or season pass model, and I think there's a good chance that the next Battlefield game will do the same, and from a player standpoint it's going to be a fantastic change. Premium does split the player base quite significantly, and although DICE have done a good job with various friend systems to allow players to try out premium, it's still going to be a barrier. Moving on now to more gameplay, I'd love to see way less grenade spam. I know, it's war, and I think that's why DICE like all of the grenades, as it just creates this constant cinematic feeling of explosions, but from a gameplay perspective, despite some changes of the system over the past year, I think there's still way too many grenades in play at any one time. Incendiary gas, light anti-tank, standard grenade, impact grenade, anti-tank, crossbow launcher, mortars, dynamite, rocket guns. There's a lot of explosions in this game. I personally would love to see that toned down a bit and have more of a focus on the gunplay and team play rather than easy kills with grenades. And speaking of explosive damage, behemoths. I wouldn't have any problem if I never saw a behemoth in a Battlefield game again. They're a spectacle for sure. When we first saw that airship coming down on Quentin's Scar, it looked incredible. But for the most part, I think that behemoths don't make for a hugely enjoyable experience. It just feels like the winning team are getting punished more often than not, and it doesn't help to turn around the game either. But I accept that some people would disagree with that. They might love behemoths, but I'm not a big fan. They just seem really gimmicky to me. The next feature I want to talk about, well, I don't want it to be removed because that's impossible, but it's got to be improved upon massively, the in-game user interface or the HUD. I'm sure other people have had the same problem, but a few days ago I had maybe 4 or 5 friends in the same Battlefield server with spaces, but only one of those friends had a joinable button despite the fact that they're all in the same server. It just makes no sense, and on PC in particular, it just doesn't work. Sometimes you may not get a join button whatsoever, despite the fact, there are spaces on the server. I joined one of the guys in the end and got into the server, but the experience, and I think this is mainly on PC, I don't know what it's like on console, but people have actually tweeted me and told me that the friends and party system on console is just as bad as it is on PC. It's always quite frustrating, really. The PC party system is flawed. I remember when it launched and you could get a message over your screen when a party member left and joined a new server, not to mention the fact that you can't seem to make your party private or kick people. And I recently played Bad Company 2 and did a couple of videos on it, and the in-game friend system on that just works perfectly. Your friend joins a game, a second later you can join their server. It just works, but sadly the reason I think it works is because Battlefield Bad Company 2 is actually on Steam now, and Steam is just a better system than Origin, so I feel like it could be that Origin is the main culprit of the UI problems here, and that's a hard one to fix. I think it's ridiculous in a AAA game like Battlefield, we still don't have a friends or squad system that works perfectly. The server browser too, I think this needs to give you way more information about when a round is ending or how much is left of a game. Often I've gone to try and join a specific map, maybe to complete an assignment or unlock a weapon for example, and I've joined a game that says it's on a map, but after I join the game it's actually loading a new map. And that's just really frustrating, and then you can't quit out of the game until the game loads, so you've just got all these little things that are just building up and frustrating you. The server browser, the UI, the squad party system, it needs a complete overhaul for the next Battlefield game. And why is it quicker for me to Alt F4 the game than actually just press the quit button? Sometimes it just does this weird loading thing where it's like, quitting? Why do you need to load anything to quit the game? Just put me back to the main menu or quit the game, thanks. I'd also love for the new Conquest system to be scrapped and just replaced with the old system. Right now the system is massively simplified. Both teams get tickets for holding flags regardless of how many flags that they hold. So if one team holds 4 flags and the other 2, they'll both gain tickets, but of course the first team will gain more because they hold more flags. That's fine and it works, it's simple to understand, but the old Conquest system from previous Battlefield games I think was far better, and it was reliant on your team having a majority of the flags to gain tickets, or lose tickets depending on if you count up or down. With the old system, if you had 3 flags and the enemy team had 2, then you'd be gaining tickets, or you would control the ticket bleed as it used to be called, but the enemy would not. This means that not only could team play make a big difference, but comebacks were really possible if a team got their act together, regardless of how far behind they were. Comebacks just don't happen in BF1 in Conquest matches, and if they do, it's incredibly rare to see. Kills still counted towards tickets. If you weren't revived, you would lose a ticket, so you would have to take that into account. The downside of the old system though is that games could last way longer because points or tickets would not always be earned that fast, especially if both teams have an equal amount of flags. This old Conquest system was actually tested on the CTE for BF1 a while back, but sadly it wasn't brought forward for various reasons, but I hope that we can see it in the game once again. If I had my way, I'd go back to the old majority flag system, but I'd count up instead of down and maybe put a time limit of 30 minutes on to make sure that you don't get prolonged extensive games. And while we're on the subject of Conquest Assault. Now I'm really not sure that this works well in Battlefield 1. Conquest Assault is an old school game mode. I remember it in BF2 on Strike at Karkin best. But back then there were so many transport vehicles available to players, and I think the community was a bit more niche and team play focused and actually worked together to try and flank and get around the back to capture those back flags. But I don't think it works well in Battlefield 1, and there are some maps that it doesn't work well on at all, River Somme and Caporetto being 2 recent examples. I understand why they might want to use Conquest Assault on those specific maps, because it's representing the attacking narrative of what happened in real life at those particular battles. The British pushing back the Germans on the Somme, for instance, but in my opinion, both of those maps would just work far better if they were vanilla Conquest. So when does the narrative of history become less important than the enjoyment of the game? Now, how good Conquest Assault works in a future game really depends on what setting it is and how the map is planned out with transport vehicles, but I think it needs to be heavily revised and looked at. My gut feeling is that at the moment the community does not like Conquest Assault maps, and in public games, Conquest seems to work much better. There are a couple of decent Conquest Assault maps in BF1 in my opinion. Zeebrugge, for example, works well because it's really wide and spread out. There isn't just a funnel for all the enemies to kill you as you're coming out of your spawn. And also a map like Heligoland Bight, because you've got this massive area of sea and you can use the boats to get around the back, you can use planes to jump out, airships, whatever. So there are a couple of maps that work well with it in BF1, but for the most part, it didn't strike a chord with the community in my opinion. And this brings me onto something else, map design. I was thinking about this the other day and I found a pattern in the maps that I prefer. In Battlefield 1, I really love maps like Amiens, St. Quentin Scar, Ballroom Blitz, even Fort Vaux, and from previous games, Grand Bazaar, St. Crossing, maybe even Siege of Shanghai. And something that they all have in common is that they aren't particularly open maps. They all have a solid cover structure to them and very defined lanes. They have plenty of buildings and different areas that you can use to duck into and cover yourself or regenerate health, but there aren't so many angles there that you can't learn them. Other maps, for instance, like Passchendaele, Sinai Desert or Nivelle Nights, to use them as examples, are far more open maps with small cover dotted around without as many structured points or lanes. Now, I'm not saying here that Battlefield maps should be linear, not in the slightest. Battlefield has always had open maps and that's how it should stay, but I think something like St. Quentin Scar is an open map done right. You find yourself moving between points easily, but it's still got some open areas, and in those open areas there's plenty of cover for you to use. Something like Passchendaele, while I do enjoy it, it feels like a war, it feels a bit more messy in its style. Of course, the maps people like and enjoy is entirely opinionated and subjective, and even though I listed maps I prefer, I do like Passchendaele. It's just interesting that when I broke down the maps I preferred, I could see that there was a link between them and between the ones that I didn't like as much. I think the spawn system in BF1 needs some looking at too. Often you can select a spawn point on a flag, but you might spawn so far away and end up closer to another one. It doesn't make much sense, or even worse, right out in the open with no cover around you. Look at Soissons as a great example of that. That's a very frustrating thing to happen. I do think a bit more thought and time needs to be put into where players will respawn around flags, because it can massively improve the player experience. Just a couple days ago I was spawning in and still I'd be behind an enemy player or they'd be behind me and I'd instantly die. That's incredibly annoying and it really turns people off the game. Moving on, I think if I asked, let's say 100 people what they thought of the elites in Battlefield 1, I'd get a very varied response. Some people hate them and some people love them. I suspect it depends on if you're the one using them or not, because if you get an elite, you can have a ton of fun with them. The Tank Hunter and the Infiltrator are my favourites, but likewise, they can be very frustrating to come up against at times. That being said, I don't think it's a bad system, and it really is just trying to take the Battlefield 4 weapon pickup system a bit further, but I'd actually like to see it go back in that direction. In BF4 you could pick up those power weapons like a grenade launcher, a 50 cal sniper rifle or an explosive USAS. You then get a few kills with them, use the ammo, and then drop it again and carry on back to using your normal kit. There's more versatility there, whereas in Battlefield 1, if you've picked up an elite kit, you're pretty much committed to it. You might move slower, or you might be limited on the range if you've got a flamethrower. I think going back to a weapon system like they had in BF4, where you've got battle pickups, would be a better fit. It worked well in BF4, but it does lose a bit of that cinematic elite experience. Now, something else that's definitely going to be very divisive is the sniper mechanic known as the sweet spot. In BF1, the sweet spot is the range at which your currently equipped sniper rifle will get an instant kill with an upper body torso shot without the need for a headshot. And each sniper has a different sweet spot for the most part, or at least different ranges. Some are more close range like the Martini, some are longer range like the Springfield, so it depends on what type of scout you want to play as. Now, the good part about this system is that each sniper rifle has its own range of kill, and it does make snipers more viable. as a lot of players will know, scouts are everywhere. I understand why this system is in place here, to almost encourage people to learn the specific ranges of the sniper rifles, and then they can go on and master them. That being said, it does make sniping even easier than it already is. The scout play in Battlefield 1 is very easy. The bullet velocity on the sniper rifles are insanely fast. So to begin with, they're easier to use, but then you've got the sweet spot mechanic in there, which means you don't even need to go for a headshot sometimes, and it makes getting a kill far more simple. And I'm not sure that's such a good thing. Also, I'd love to know if when someone's playing as a scout, are you actively trying to get yourself into the sweet spot of the rifle that you're using? And do you remember them? Are you actually aware in the moment of battle that you're, say, 10 meters outside of the sweet spot and you move forwards a bit to get into it? I doubt that the majority of players are actually that aware of the sweet spot mechanic to begin with, other than perhaps knowing from experience based on playing a map what sort of range engagements work. I'd personally like to see it go back to a more skill-based system where going for headshots for a one-shot kill was a requirement. In BF4, they did it well in my opinion. And just to wrap up, a few quick fire points I want to mention. Becoming a human torch after running over a small fire on the ground. That is so annoying. Tiny flames, you set alight. Even worse if you're on a small amount of health and it costs you your life. I don't mind there being fire scattered around the map, but I just make it a visual only effect. Obviously, if it's come from an incendiary grenade or a spotting flare or a tank that's exploded, then I understand that it could do damage to me, but the small flames that are jotted around everywhere on maps like Amiens and Passchendaele, they're just annoying. Let's get rid of them. Getting stuck on scenery is still one of my pet peeves with Battlefield games. The vaulting system in BF1 is pretty good to be fair, and it works a lot of the time, but there are still many scenery elements where you've got to vault numerous times to get over them, and often it can get you killed. And then there are some small geometry objects that are seemingly unvaultable and you just get stuck on them, so some refinement in that area would be great to see. It's been a problem that's plagued Battlefield games since BF3. Medal system and progression system in BF1 was pretty bad. I'm hoping that they go back to the drawing board for Battlefield 2018 on that one. And finally, last couple of things, the gunplay in the game. I don't mind the gunplay in BF1, I've got used to it now, but I feel like there is an argument perhaps for the spread mechanics to be reworked. And also RSP, the rent a server program. I'm not suggesting that we should go back to pro-con days where admins can add ridiculous rules and change core game mechanics like vehicle respawn time. But I definitely feel like RSP needs a lot more options for it to be a viable alternative to what we used to have, because there's no doubt that a lot of communities were broken up after the BF1 RSP launched in such a basic state. And that's all for today, guys. Do let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. There will be a part 2 of this video where I'll be covering what I think should be carried across from BF1, the things that I like and they've definitely improved upon over previous games in the franchise. Look out for that, should be coming out very soon. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down. Let me know your comments below, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.